Turning to a horrific story out of Florida, a father stands accused of killing his own teen son with a power tool. The 16-year-old was living with his grandfather. Scripps News Tampa explains when the grandfather left the home for a few hours on Monday, he returned home to the boy's father outside, who warned him not to go inside.
It's something many of us couldn't imagine happening. A father killing his very own son. But that's exactly what the Polk County Sheriff's Office is investigating.
We don't know why he did what he did today, other than he's a nasty, nasty, evil person.
This is the 16-year-old victim, Thomas Rodda, who was killed Monday morning in Lake Wells by his father, who shares the same name. According to Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd, the Frostproof high school student was living with his grandfather and had a lot to look forward to in life.
He was to start work next week at Burger King to earn money so that he could buy a car.
He was also studying to be an electrician, which was his dream job. His life cut short by the very person who was supposed to protect him.
Well, on this particular morning, Thomas Rodda, the grandfather, left about 8 o'clock to go visit with his wife in rehab.
And that's when Sheriff Judd says the father showed up at the house and killed his own son with an angle grinder, which is a handheld power tool. When the grandfather returned home around 11 a.m., he says he was unexpectedly met outside with the suspect, his son.
And his quote was, "I wouldn't go in there if I was you. I killed someone."
The grandfather called the police, but the suspect had gotten away. However, eventually, deputies were able to catch up to him and arrest him.
And when we took him into custody, he told our deputy, "You probably need to read me my rights." And that's exactly what we did.
The victim's family says the suspect, who's bounced around the country and has an outstanding warrant in South Carolina, has been known to have dealt with mental health illness.
We are told that Thomas Rodda used methamphetamine since high school, and he has psychotic episodes.
And now, many are faced with the same question. What would make this father kill his own son? A question the Polk County Sheriff's Office is actively investigating.
We lost a great young man, and we've got an evil, evil man in custody, and we're going to do our best to see that he spends the rest of his life in prison.
In Lake Wells, I'm Anthony Hill, ABC Action News.
Still with us, criminal defense attorneys Jack Rice and Josh Schiffer. Gentlemen, no surprise to you that especially cases with kids just get me in the heart. This 16-year-old. And the thing that sticks out to me is when you hear that he is reported as having the defendant meth use in his past, psychotic episodes, but yet you just heard law enforcement say that he told his father, "I killed someone," and then he told law enforcement, "You probably need to read me my rights." To me, that means he was probably in his right mind. Josh.
All right, so I was just dealing with a juvenile case that has a lot of, or right beyond juvenile, and George is 17, how small teenagers still are and how undeveloped they are. And then you see a crime of unspeakable cruelty, like killing someone with an angle grinder, which may be joining my top 10 of absolute nightmares. But he is there and understands that he did something wrong. He's making admissions. He knows enough to get his rights. That's where the question of competency really gets even more difficult, because when evaluating competency, especially on a juvenile, you have not just how competency works and the various standards state use, but then you get into the development of the brain discussion. And scientists for years have been pounding on the criminal justice system that young people's brains aren't finished growing and, cooking. I always use the cooking a biscuit analogy. And it's just not done until your early 20s. So how can you send someone to prison forever? And a 16-year-old with methamphetamines, oh my Lord, make me clutch my pearls.
Well, and the father killed the 16-year-old. And the 16-year-old, I have to wonder, Jack, if the 16-year-old might have thought, it's my dad. I'm here at Granddad's, it's his son. Oh, it's okay to let him in, my dad's here. Thinking it's a person of trust, which it should be. And then, to Josh's point, killing with a handheld power tool, an angle grinder. I mean, this is horrible.
Yeah, this is the tragedy that I think we all fear. And we think about this not just as professionals, not just as a judge, not just as prosecutors or criminal defense attorneys. I think it really is parents, the idea of wanting to protect our own and knowing that this is the job that actually matters for us more than the rest. And as time goes on, you start to realize it even more. And then you see these kinds of stories. This is the brutality that I think that we sometimes see in the system that people don't realize. But to address your initial question about this competency issue, you really look at it two ways. First of all, the father knew that what he did was wrong because he said, you don't want to go in there. He knows it's bad. But more importantly, when you come back afterward, he says, you better read me my rights. So in other words, he understands the process to some degree. He's clearly been involved if there's a warrant for his arrest and he's had other use in the past. But what we also understand is he understands rights and how those work, at least to some degree. And that's going to really buttress this argument. You don't have the ability to come back, generally speaking, afterward and say, I didn't know where I was. I don't know what I was doing. I thought I was doing something else. He knew that he was killing somebody, and he knew that there was a due process, and he still started speaking with these officers, and he spoke with his father first without anybody asking him anything. All of that's going to come in. All of that's likely going to result in something pretty terrible. My guess is this is the kind of case that's going to resolve in some sort of a plea. But it's early on. It all depends upon how the prosecution wants to chase this one down.
Yeah, I agree with that. And let me ask you this, Josh, because I want to look specifically again at what we have been told the defendant said. And he said, after he walked out and saw his father, the boy's grandfather, I killed someone. Now, this is his son, but yet the wording is, I killed someone. Is that anything you'd hang on to, Josh, as a defense attorney? And I see you reacting, so I think it is.
You can always create by focusing. You know, it's like slowing down a video. A video can make perfect sense until I've slowed it down and replayed it from 3 angles 15 times, and it changes context and your interpretation. So yeah, you can read into that very specific choice of words, and vernacular use is reflective on mental health. Vernacular use is reflective on mental state at the time. But again, like Jack's saying, the tragedy and the horror in this is so huge that the state doesn't necessarily want to go through a giant show trial. They want to dispose of the case. Many people will be hurt exploring the tragedy that went on here because it's inexplicable. And we'll have to see where the mental health stuff comes back, because obviously that's something the state takes into consideration in making their decisions. If the state has information showing that someone really is suffering or belaboring under a verified long-term chronic mental health condition that prevents them from determining the difference between good and evil, you know, that's very different from a psych report that says, hey, they suffer from generalized anxiety and depression.
So if the psych report is that you're suffering from general anxiety and depression, and you use methamphetamine throughout your life, and you have a previous criminal history, Jack, let me ask you this. Heinousness of the crime, previous criminal history, if in fact there are no significant mental health issues, this is in the state of Florida, is it potentially a death penalty case?
Yes. Yes, it is. I mean, one of the reasons that this potentially is, you know, what you were asking Josh about just before was this idea of he killed someone. If you could make the argument, I went into the house and I thought there was a stranger in the house and I was defending my son who was in the house, you could try to make that argument, but you can't, because in this particular case, he killed him with an angle grinder, allegedly. And with that in mind, he had to be right up on top of him. And that really takes that away from you. And if you contemplate that this is Florida, remember, Texas, Florida, Virginia, the 3 biggest death penalty states in the nation, they're the ones who employ it more than anybody else. When you start talking about somebody like this with a history that's violent, with a history of use and with something as heinous like this, there is the potential that this could certainly turn into a death penalty case, which brings me back to that concept of where does this case go? Do they hold on to the death penalty and say, we are going to go after this guy with that, we're not offering you life in prison? Or do they simply say, as Josh alluded to, do we dispose of this quickly and say, I'll tell you what, you will never see the light of day. We will take you forever, but we're not going to choose the death penalty. Would that be enough? For some people, they appreciate and they're willing to grab onto that. For others, the response is, if that's what my options are, it doesn't matter, I'm rolling the dice.
Yeah, that's a great point. And again, psychotic episodes indicates perhaps a significant mental history or mental health, which means perhaps, Josh, they wouldn't seek the death penalty. Josh, it seems like you might have something to add.
I wanted to add something because you just touched on it, and it's the drug interaction. I've got a case dealing with this right now where the state's position is that the person has consumed so many drugs that now they are psychotic, and it's a self-induced inebriation-based psychosis that manifests very real. The guy is in tough straits, but it's a voluntary intoxication, and one of the things you learn in law school, voluntary intoxication is not a defense.
Yep.
And so you really get into some sticky stuff with what's the mental health treatment, what's the mental health process when the mental health condition may be spiked, caused, in concurrence with illegal drug use of the kind that can cause you to mentally decline, aka methamphetamines.
Yeah, methamphetamine is
hardcore
terrible.
opiate use eats your brain.
Yeah, it does.
Literally eats your brain.
It does. It causes horrible things. Unfortunately, we see that in many of the cases that we cover. The other piece of this is, I just lost my train of thought because I was thinking about the methamphetamine use, but I absolutely agree with you. We'll have to see. I know what it was. I think they'll probably have experts on both sides, right? Because both sides are going to want to look at what his mental health capacity is, his mental capacity before they go forward.